Mr. Ash says we're on Viewpoint. We're on the air, live, ready to go. Good morning, Mrs. Busby.
And good morning to you.
Program of politicians' perspectives, and what was the other one? Caught you.
Personalities.
Personalities.
Yeah,
I just wanted
sleep at the
it's a
switch
test.
here.
You almost failed it. You almost failed the test.
Listen, that's not the first test I failed.
It's early in the morning, so don't worry about that. Soapbox time.
Okay.
What was it, 25, 30, 40 years ago? Newt Minow said, TV is a vast wasteland.
Prophetic.
Hadn't got the doggone
From
bit
his
better.
mouth to God's ears, huh?
Yeah, what brings it to mind is the mayor and your husband, city council, and so forth are trying to work with Comcast, or Comcast is trying to work with them. I'm not sure how that works, to improve Comcast services. Well, the sad truth is there's just not a heck of a lot out there to watch on TV unless it's history and documentary stuff. The programming is just... It's the dumbing down of America. The mind-run programming, voyeurism, and realism shows and so forth. Well, that's my soapbox. I think we ought to introduce our guest.
Yeah, but can I say one thing about that?
Oh, you're a half owner. Go ahead.
I have been kind of one of the squatlies, I guess, in that I've been out at the new hospital pretty near daily for several days, because we've been having open houses for various groups, and still continue to do so. And it's been very rewarding. And I got a book last night from Springfield Clinic, who is the organization that serves Lincoln, and all the pictures of all the physicians that are members of Springfield Clinic in it. And if not a majority, very close to that, were people who didn't look like they were born and raised in central Illinois.
You notice that's happening?
I do. And, you know, while these other countries are ramping up and going for broke on education, we seem to be putting it on a back burner. And maybe it's time to wake up. Past.
Well, comments about TV. I wrote this. Somewhere I saw this and I wrote it down. It said, TV commercials are created by a subspecies of addle-brained humans. Well, some of these TV commercials are produced by people that appear to be in that category. I mean, there's just really, they assault your senses. Anyway, let's introduce John.
Well, yeah, I think that would be nice. John Lebegue.
Glad to have you with us, sir.
Glad to be here.
He's the code enforcement officer for Lincoln. And I think this is an office of the city that we know little about, other than maybe if we're going to add a room to our house, we know we have to have a building permit. But that's about the end of it as far as I'm concerned. I'm so glad, John, that you could be with us today and tell us a little bit about how all this works and your background that leads you to become a code enforcement officer. Where did you come from and how did you get here, John?
Well, I guess my life's been a roundabout fashion, most of it. I kind of fell into code enforcement to some extent. After graduating college back, a long time ago, I came out with a political science degree, which didn't give you a whole lot of options, quite frankly. You either can be a lawyer or a teacher. And I didn't really want to do either, so I ended up getting a master's degree in public administration, which is more geared towards city management and development, things of that nature. And after graduating, I came out of college at a time where there was a shortage of jobs. So instead of going into municipal government right away, I worked in the construction industry for 3 years as a project manager, traveled all over the country on different jobs, picked up a lot of experience, at least from an organizational and management perspective, doing that. And I've always been somewhat of a very hands-on type of person, very handy, be able to fix just about anything. I think that goes back to growing up.
Feel free to drop by my house
Yeah, I'm
anytime.
sitting here thinking about that. He could come to 214.
I don't even want to tell most people that, because I do get, oh, well, you know, you can fix this, you can fix that. I'm usually the whole block's handyman wherever I live. But, you know, when I look back on it, when I grew up on a farm, so, I mean, there you more or less, you either learn how to fix stuff or you had to pay through the nose to get it fixed.
Exactly.
And I had a father who was a pipe fitter and more or less a jack of all trades. And you know, a lot of what I've learned and what I've become is thanks to him. And so when you know, getting back to how I ended up in code enforcement, well, after working in construction and traveling all those years, I kind of got tired of that. And there was a job opening in Riverside, Illinois, for a building and zoning director for their municipality. And Riverside is a bedroom type community up in the Chicagoland area, one of the only literally planned communities in the country. It was done by Olmsted, who is also the individual who designed Central Park and the Biltmore Estate and things of that nature. So it had a lot of historical significance. And I worked there for 4 years, more or less got my feet wet in the municipal game, and kind of put me on the path of where I'm at. But I lived in the Chicagoland area for 18 years prior to coming down here. Well, not quite a year ago. It's almost a year. It'll be a year at the end of this month. I came down to Lincoln.
And word has it that you're doing a very, very good job.
Well, it's, you know, some days I feel like I'm doing better than others, but I definitely have seen progress in the time that I've been here.
Well, the property owners that have got their property down probably don't speak as highly of you as you and I might. But,
that probably is the case.
That's a never-ending problem, and the never-ending difficulty to solve that problem. Because if you have people, and we certainly do, who just have no interest in keeping their properties up, then we have to go to the courts, and that's a long, laborious process. And in the meantime, the police keep going down. So you've got a tough job there, John.
It is. I think, you know, when I came in and looked around the community, and, you know, I saw some challenges, there's no doubt. I mean, I guess that's putting it mildly. But I think, you know, from my perspective, you look at it as something that you want to change progressively. You're not going to change it overnight. It didn't happen overnight.
No.
It happened over a period of time, and I think everyone has to realize that it's going to take, you know, an equal amount of time to turn it the other direction. I think, you know, in Lincoln's case, at least what I've seen in the time that I've been there, I think a large majority of the properties in need of repair and where you see a lack of conscience, so to speak, of maintaining that property is rentals. There's a high volume of rental properties in Lincoln. And with that, a lot of times comes, you know, tenants who just don't care. They'll throw their garbage out the back door and just leave it lay there until the animals will strewn it all over the yard, and things of that nature. So that in itself is a huge challenge. And landlords have it tough, no matter what. I think one thing that I have noted is a vast difference of the Chicagoland area versus down in South Central Illinois.
In what respect?
What's that?
In what respect?
Is the landlord's rights. Up north, if you don't pay your rent, or if certain things, you know, contrary to your lease, you'll find your stuff out on the curb. And they have the legal authority to do that. Whereas down in this region, you don't see that as much. It's very difficult for landlords to you know, force out a real troublesome tenant. And what we're seeing, at least what I see in a lot of cases, is, you know, you have a property that's been neglected, whether the owner neglects it or the tenant just destroys it. It makes it difficult for that owner, that landlord, to attract a better tenant unless he fixes it. But if he fixes it, he can, you know, kind of go right back into that vicious circle again. So that in itself is something that I'm really going to have to try to come up with a strategy of how to turn these properties around.
Can we jump off from that point and take the code part of your job? From whence cometh the code, and do you have any input into changing or introducing new codes to facilitate all this?
Yes, and in fact, the city's codes, if everyone is not aware, are very outdated, unfortunately. It is a type of job that it takes a lot of study. I've introduced new codes in 3 different communities, basically in some cases starting from scratch. There are a whole new set of codes available now that will be coming available in April. The newest international codes, which are from a building perspective, but they also have a code for property maintenance. They have a code for any number of things, and that will be something that will be updated in the coming months.
Will that be mandatory for everyone then across the country?
Well, it's an international code that a lot of communities do adopt because it's a uniform code, and I think that's what the code industry really wants. It makes it easier for designers, architects, contractors to know what each municipality requires. If each one has a different code, which used to be the case, they had to learn that individual municipality's code to be able to do business there. By adopting an international type code, you get a broad-based code that everyone knows what's what. So at least, from a development standpoint, if you have a development group, say in Oregon, that all of a sudden wants to build something in Lincoln, they can look online and say, oh, you're going with the international codes. Right. They don't have to look any further. It's universally known, and from that perspective, I think it'll do Lincoln a huge benefit by going to those codes in the near future. And as far as adopting new codes, that is something that I'm very, very experienced at doing. And I've already done that to some extent in Lincoln. We've updated a good number of codes that hadn't been updated in more than 20 years in some cases, and even longer than that in others. And I think one code in particular that I will be looking at probably when I do the international review will be the property maintenance code. I may broaden it in some respects, even what the code is. You can do that. You can actually make it more stringent or less stringent in some circumstances than what is written. But in our circumstance in Lincoln, I really want to have a code that will address what I see out there. And right now, unfortunately, our codes don't give me that broad authority that I really want. I want specific regulations for the type of violations we're seeing.
The idea is to benefit the entire community, not individuals.
That's correct.
For the benefit of the area.
When you talk to a person about a violation insofar as the upkeep of their property or properties is concerned, then does it not can it not finally end up in court and the person be forced in that manner to abide by a code?
Well, yes. I think when I came on board, I think the court system is never an avenue I like to take for myself and for the resident or for the business owner. I've never been a huge fan of it. I've been very successful in court, but I've never been a huge fan of it. In some ways, I see as if I go to court, that means I failed in some regard of getting the problem resolved. I couldn't do it within my own authority and my own pervasive, persuasion to get things done. I would say out of the number of violations that we have, which have increased dramatically since I've gotten there, in most cases we have 80%, at least 80% compliance, which is a really high rate, and that's generally done within the 7-day period of the notice. And what I have really introduced, I think, to the community is the fact that I'm available to talk to. It's on the bottom of the letter. Call me. Tell me what the circumstances are.
As opposed to mandating.
Right.
Well, the mandating part of it is...
But you're having some communication avenue along with that.
Exactly. I mean, I want them to tell me. If there's something going on in their life, if they're out of town, if they're... whatever things they're facing, I'm not aware of that when I drive by and see something.
Right.
I need them to reach out to me and tell me what's what. Tell me what's going on. Maybe you need another 7 days to get it accomplished. My goal is to get it accomplished. It isn't to fine them. It isn't to take them to court or any of that nature. It's to make that area and their neighborhood better, and that's kind of what I'm working towards.
If someone's reluctant to comply, what do you do? Can you just say please and thank you, or?
No, that's when the court system comes into play, where you'll go through my notification, and if it's and if it's not complied, not done, then I will forward it to our city attorney. And if it's a first-time offense for them, they'll send a letter from their office to the individual, giving them 10 days to correct it, and telling them you either correct it within this 10 days, or we will go to court, and you will go before the judge, and it's a minimum penalty of $75. And a lot of times, I would say over probably 70% of the times that our city attorney sends a letter, it's complied with. So, when you get right down to it, there's a very small percentage right now that we're actually in court with. And those are, in a lot of cases, the chronic offenders, those that...
We're used to that around here, aren't we?
In those circumstances, I don't want to say I want to make an example, but I want to send a message. Sure. I want them to know that we're not going to tolerate it any further, and, enough's enough. And, we've had those circumstances where, we're getting to that point. And I think Lincoln is a small enough type community that word travels pretty quickly that let's get it done, because we're not going to lengthen this process on any longer.
I wanted to ask you, John, if you didn't find quite a culture shock moving from the metropolitan area to our smaller community down here. Number one, just individually, as far as living and so forth is concerned, that's a major difference. Any outstanding things that you might want to refer to without stepping on the mayor's toes or mine?
Well, when that question's been posed to me quite often.
Sure.
It's like, how did you ever end up in Lincoln? And in a lot of ways, what it is for me, I guess as I've gotten older, which is inevitable in life, you kind of reminisce and you kind of go full circle sometimes about what you do. I mean, I grew up rural. I spent probably some of my happier years of my life living on a farm and things of that nature. So when this job became available and I looked into it, I'm thinking, in a lot of ways, this is the type of direction I wanted to take. I mean, I spent all those years in the Chicagoland area in that rat race and that fishbowl, so to speak, and enough was enough. I mean, the traffic. I mean, it takes me 5 minutes to get to work now, where it used to take me an hour and a half.
Yes.
Sure.
One way.
Yeah.
And I spent 3 hours of my day in a car.
Yeah.
And there are a lot to be said for not having that level of stress and anxiety in one's life.
Rush hour in Lincoln beats that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it might
You could say that.
Might take you 2 minutes longer in rush hour.
Yeah.
John, is there one particular thing that has been brought to your attention since you've been here on the job that has required your attention? Is there anything outstanding that you might think of that?
I think when I came on board, the one thing that I took a more or less immediate action was when we changed the code enforcement process. We changed that. We shortened the timelines considerably, and we raised the penalties. The fines and penalties were such that they weren't a deterrent. $25 to go to court and only be fined $25 for a violation was not something that got anyone's attention.
You can't even buy a gallon of paint for that.
Right. So I immediately more or less said, no, this has got to change. Let's, increase it up to 75 minimum, 500 maximum, and the maximum previously was 100. It just wasn't getting the message across to those that weren't complying with the ordinances. So I think that was the first order of business, so to speak, of getting things changed, going into a different direction. And I think, now individuals, get to court and they, literally one guy was sitting in court and he heard what the fine was against someone else. He goes, did I hear right? That was the fine? I go, yes, that was the fine. And he goes, oh my God, I'm going to have to make sure I keep my properties up. So from that perspective, I think the message is getting across.
You introduced that as an incentive.
In some ways, yes.
Right.
That's known as the 2-before theory.
There you go. This business of the foreclosures, has that made a difference in your job?
I think it's made it more challenging. With the foreclosure process, as lengthy and as it is, you see properties in limbo for anywhere between 6 months to a year, where it's hard for one to figure out who exactly owns it and who controls it. And from that perspective, you've got properties that the grass gets tall, or individuals will dump on that property. There'll be stuff thrown all over it, and then you try to track down an owner or a financial institution that's taken control of it, and that can be very, very difficult. We had a few properties last summer that, quite frankly, we ended up mowing them all summer, and now we've got a pretty hefty lien on those properties to try to figure out eventually who's going to ever step forward to take responsibility for them. I started seeing the foreclosure issues when I was in Lincolnwood back in 2008. Before I left there, you were starting to see properties abandoned, and neighbors mowing the grass and calling my office saying, "Well, the grass isn't getting cut. There's branches all over the yard." You started to see that reality hitting then.
Can you put a lien on a property that is being foreclosed on?
Yes, you can. It goes against the property, and it's filed against that property. It's filed at the recorder's office, so when that property is sold, that pops up as an encumbrance against the property. It doesn't matter if it's in foreclosure or what state it's in, that is filed against the property. So whenever it's sold, that'll pop up when they do a title search on it, because it'll show up that it's on there.
A lien is a remedy that you can use then?
Well, it's a remedy to recoup costs. In our circumstances, we have to mow those properties sometimes, and we accrue anywhere between $40 to $75 each time we mow it, depending on the size of the property.
I'll do it for that.
He wants another job.
I think we're in the wrong business.
Restricted income, anything to augment it. John, a question regarding building. If I decide to have contractor A add 10 feet to my house for whatever reason, that has to come through your office for approval, and they have to follow a significant code to do that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Anytime you're adding on to a structure or things of that nature, there's a zoning as well as a building review that's involved. I mean, plans are submitted so that they can be reviewed to see that they conform to the adopted codes, and you also have to verify from a zoning perspective whether there's sufficient lot available to add on to a house, or that the setbacks are correct, that you're not building too close to a property line or to the front yard or things of that nature. So there is a certain amount of review that is involved with pretty much everything to some extent or another.
Now, if I had a sewer line that connected obviously to the main sewer out in the street, and it was incumbent upon me, because I had a blockage or whatever, to have that dug up, do we have to go to the city hall and get permission for that?
Yes, you would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've in some
and is
ways.
There a fee for that?
Yes, there is. In most cases, with that, I mean, the fees are. It ranges, but I mean, typically with something in what you're describing there is about $20 to $40 permit fee, and if they have to go into the street, then they have to put down a deposit to verify that the street's going to be repaired after after the repairs are done.
And if it's a brick street, is it incumbent upon them to put the bricks rather than pour concrete and then use a brick stamp?
Well, that's something I really haven't addressed very heavily yet. I know Tracy's, the street superintendent, is had that issue for years, because sure. Once you tear those bricks out, you're never going to get that tight.
Yep.
That it's never going to go back together the same way.
Europeans do it all the time.
But
had done for years.
But I don't know. That's something that I think we're going to have to look at, because we still have a good number of brick streets. Mm-hmm. And given the ages of the homes, you're going to see more and more sewer issues over time. And it's inevitable that the sewers are going to start being a problem for a lot of these homes. We've seen just in the spring a good number of sewer repairs come in. So you're starting to see it as a regular occurrence.
Well, it's not on your jurisdiction. These doggone sweet gum balls must be a terrible problem for the sewage department. It just has to be a real problem. Go ahead, Judith K. You were going to ask something.
I was laughing about the gumballs. Do you have any jurisdiction over lot lines? You know, Bill and I both have had our houses for, I don't know, an awful long time, and I can't remember whether either of it. We live next door to one another and have, of course.
It's been a real problem.
Yeah, it has been a burden to him. Jeez, Bill. I can't remember whether either of us ever had that surveyed. Do you have to have it surveyed when you buy a property? Or do you have any jurisdiction over that? And we've got a fence, a common fence. I don't know whose line it's on.
It's pretty common, I'll give you that.
I don't know whose line it's on, and does it matter?
Well, that is one thing that I've noticed an enormous difference between the Chicagoland area and coming down here. Up there, everyone has a survey, you know, and when they come in for whether it's a fence or an addition or whatever, a survey was always, you know, I would want to see a survey to see what's what. Down here, that's not the case. Most individuals don't have a survey, and up there, you know, when you close on a property, you show up. Both, survey is part of the documents that are required for the closing. I don't see that that's the issue down here in southern Illinois, where, you know, you don't see the requirements for surveys. So a lot of times it's, you know, what I've dealt with since I've been here is that people, well, that's, you know, that's always been there, and it's, you know, in some cases, yeah, it's right, and probably the other half of the times it's not. So it's, I think what you'll see is when there is a dispute or there is a question, then you'll have to bring a surveyor in and get a survey to figure out what's what. If
Bill gets just entirely too sick of living next door to me, and somebody buys that property, what if we don't know where the lot line is, and they survey it, and we've made a boo-boo?
Well, there's a lot of that, quite frankly, and you know, it'll show up as, you know, say a fence. A good example, or I've dealt with where someone had landscape area that it, you know, we found out that it actually extended 6 or 8 inches over onto a neighbor's property. The neighbors didn't complain, and it would show up as an encumbrance on that other property. But if there's no, you know, issues with it, then there's usually not a problem one way or the other. But there are times when someone will, you know, move into a property and they'll discover that and say, I want that off my property. And you do see that. You know, there's a good number of individuals that take that tact. It's not one that I personally take. I mean,
you got to wonder about a person like that, you know.
You know, I guess they want what's theirs, and that's that. And there's some that'll instantly come in and build a fence. You know, they'll stake out what's theirs, and by God, they're going to put a fence up so that they know what's what.
Yeah, I know. It seems like sweating the small stuff in a life that's already got problems incumbent to it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about that, and that's, you know, I've dealt with, you know, circumstances where we've had shared driveways, and one wanted to do the driveway and the other did not, and it was a nightmare.
Do you
I know of an example.
You example. Go ahead and example.
I know of an example where the guy put a big wide driveway, somebody did, and one of the property owners put fence right down the middle of the driveway.
I've seen that happen too. It boggles the mind sometimes what you see. But, you know, on the other hand, you see a lot of cooperation between neighbors, too. So I guess it kind of balances out a lot of times. But, and I usually get pulled into it. They usually try to pull me into it as the dispute, you know, to settle it one way or the other. And I'll do that as much as I can, but I don't want to get involved if it's a civil issue between neighbors that, quite frankly, that's not my role. My role is to say how it relates to the codes, whether it's building, zoning, or municipal.
My role right now is we better take a couple of minutes for a commercial break or we're going to get fired.